All right, hello. So this is Kevin McCain with Idaho Art Classes and Kevin McCain Studios, and we are studying about light on basic core shapes or form shadows, as we call them. And so we've got we've got a pyramid, we've got the cylinder, the sphere, the cube, and we have the cone. And these are the common shapes that many things are built from, whether it be a pear, and this pear is basically just a spherical shape with a cone that's had the end chopped off, or whether it be something like this, a little bit more fanciful. But again, we still have, this is more of an egg shape, but again, it's round. And then we have this turned and twisted cylinder on there. And then of course we have, the little fins on here that are really like, triangles with a little bit of dimension on them, sort of kind of like wedges. And of course we got the warts, but these are still these basic shapes. These warts are, again, they're a little bit egg-like in some places. Other ones are spherical, things like that. If we have cars that are basic, very much conform to the box, cityscapes, houses, bicycles, anything that has a definite right side, left side, top and bottom, you're going to develop that from the box. So, or a box and or the cube, but of course we take cubes and stack them side by side, we've got a box. So if we know how to create form shadows on these simple objects, we'll be more apt to create things with dimension no matter what we're drawing. So if I don't understand form shadows and I'm trying to draw a tree, trees are just trunking cylinder systems. And again, cars are just boxes. And we just talked about the fruit, where we have cones and, again, cylinders and all kinds of good stuff. I have certain objects like this tequila bottle. And again, this is basically a box. It's a rounded box, but it's a box nonetheless. On top of that box sits a rounded pyramid. And then up here we have a cylinder and a cylinder and a sphere. And again, that little part here is, essentially, again, another cylinder. So if we know how to create the values on there, it will help us to draw this glass bottle. Now, with glass, we have other things going on. With this stuff, it's opaque, so we only have to deal with the form shadows. With this, we have form shadows, plus we have to deal with translucency, plus we have to deal with reflectiveness. And those three properties make it far more challenging. But it's still the idea that the form shadows are still wrapping that glass. So again, form shadows, they're very, very important. You got this little chunk out of here. Maybe we can turn this a little bit so that it doesn't look quite so bad. But so we're going to talk about these different, again, these different forms and the shadows that are landing on them and so forth and so on. So I've got basically a light. The light's coming in from this direction. As far as that goes, this is my little pointer, but the light's coming in slightly at this direction, and I've got one light source. Now we have what are called direct light. This would be the direct light source, and then I also have light coming in through the windows. There might be lights on in the other parts of the room, coming in through the shades, and there's light reflecting around the room. There's what's called, indirect light sources. So the direct light source would be something that's shining right on the object, and then the indirect light is all the other light in the room. You only want one light source if you're, especially if you're a beginning artist. If you have two direct light sources, it's pretty tough to deal with because your object loses form. And then if you have multiple direct light sources, it's going to flatten out like a pancake. So the more that you can have one point of view or this one light source, the more clear the objects will be. If you muddle it up with a bunch of light sources, again, everything will go flat. So let's go ahead and talk about the form shadows. Now, with flat objects like the pyramid or this cube, you only have five different types of light sources. Pardon me, not light sources. We have 5 different types of form shadows, not light sources. Form shadows. For objects that are round, like this or this or this, it's round. We're going to have, 6. I'm trying to kind of see this. So anyways, whatever. 5. I'm trying to get my head at 5 plus 1, 6. But that was perhaps a little. That's probably gonna be the low part of this part of this video. But let's talk about the form shadows, and we're gonna have basically light side versus shadow side. We're gonna talk about the sphere first, and for those of you that are in the drawing class, we'll have you draw the sphere and the cube, and I'm sending you a picture so that you can try to sit down and draw that as well as you possibly can. But we have basically the light side and dark side, and everything here is a light side and dark side, light side, dark side, light side, dark side. And so everything has a light side or a dark side. After that, we then have form shadows that break down to either 5 or 6. Now, if it's round, it has 6. So this is round, this is round, this is round. These mounded little folds. So if I have a fold over here, this mounded little fold will have 6 types of form shadows. If we have this one back here, again, there's 6 different types of form shadows, because again, it's mounded, or in other words, it's rounded. Doesn't have to be perfectly round. It just has to be round alike. So whether it's like these mounded little folds again that you'll get here. This would have 6 form shadows on this little mound right through there. Anything that's round is going to have 6 form shadows, or round-like. And then if it's flat planes like the cube, it's only going to have 1 of 5. So again, on our little sphere here, we have, again, where the light is hitting it directly over here. We're going to if you take your eyes to look for values, and I should talk about that right now. To look for values, you take your eyes out of focus. It's called squinting. And people will always talk about, hey, squint, squint, squint whenever you're in an art class. And so, it's a good idea. It really helps. So over here is going to be where the light hits this directly, and it's going to be the lightest part of our sphere. Now it's actually kind of right about here, because here it starts to get darker as it wraps around the corner. But right around here is the lightest, or the direct light that's hitting it. You might say, well, that's a little lighter over here. Well, that's something else entirely. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But over here is what we call our light values, okay? Or our light tones. And we can actually see this thing wrap around there because it's round, right? And the shadow, if we look at that shadow, it's not the same value all the way around because light affects it. And that's what form shadows are. It's that light reveals the form of the object. If I turned out the light, everything goes a whole lot more flat. There's still some value on them, but it's much more flat. So we use light to create the illusion of depth. So again, we have our light values. As this wraps around and turns away from the light, it goes darker into what are called our middle values. So we have light values here, sometimes called the light tones. And then we have our middle values over here, or sometimes called the midtones. Now with art, unfortunately, there's no standard. So you could be in a place where they're using the proper Italian. There's places where they'll break it down not into 6 form shadows, but 12. Others will break it down into 9. If you get all the 6 of these I'm going to tell you about, though, the others will take care of themselves. So we're going to go over here and we're going to say, all right, we have our light values, and it comes over here into our middle values, and then we have a darker side of the middle values. Middle values have 2 sides. They have a light side and a darker side. So we have light values, middle values. We're looking for 3. What's the third? By the way, middle values are also sometimes called midtones. Middle values are also sometimes referred to as halftones. Halfway's in the middle, tone means value. So middle values, midtones, halftones, it's all the same place. But this right here where it's even lighter, that's our highlight. Now our highlight is very diffused because this is paper. It's fuzzy. It's made out of little fibers. If something is really slick, like this porcelain glass, it's going to have really bright, very defined highlights. Whereas something that's not really shiny, like the cloth, now this is probably polyester or something that's plasticky or something because it has a sheen to it. But, so if it was cotton cloth, it would be even flatter. What happens is when it's fuzzy, the highlight melts into the light values. So this looks like the lightest. So when I was saying light values, people might be like, hey, wait a minute, that right there is lighter. I can see it. Whoops. Right about here. That's the highlight, and it's really diffused and melting into the light values and into the middle values. So we have light values, middle values, and highlight. There's our three. And then once we hit the shadow, where the shadow and the light and shadow meet, this is the darkest place where the shadow is, and it's called a core shadow. It's only on things that are round. And so if I look over here, there's like this line going down here on that fold. That's the core shadow. If we look on this right here, there's a line that seems to be going down there. That's a core shadow. There's a line that seems to be appearing right there. That's a core shadow. Okay? So, and it's very clear on here because I'm bouncing light into it, so we have more reflected light to really indicate that core shadow on that cone. And core shadows make something feel round. If you don't have a core shadow on a round object, it will feel flat. Okay? So we always look for the core shadow, and the core shadow is the darkest part of the form shadow family. So we have the darkest, which is the core shadows. As we move away from the core shadows, we get into what are called the dark tones, or the dark values. And the dark values are lighter than the core shadow. Okay? And then we have, where it gets lighter still, is reflected light. We have a little bit of reflected light up here, which is the lightest in the shadows. We have a little bit of reflected light down here. Again, reflected light is the lightest part of the shadows. Over here we have reflected light on the cone. Again, it looks very, very light. But always remember that the reflected light is part of the shadow family. They are darker than anything in the lights. So everything in the lights are lighter than anything in the shadows. Everything in the shadows are darker than anything in the lights. Now sometimes this reflected light can be very bright and be deceiving, and we'll make it too light. This looks really light, but if I actually pulled this little chunk like in Photoshop over here into the light, it would immediately look like a blemish, like a dark spot. And that's because this looks so light, because it's next to the cast shadow, it's next to the core shadow, it's next to the dark tones. It looks lighter than what it actually is. It's an illusion. And we as artists use illusions all the time. So again, we have light values, we have highlight, we have middle values, light middle values, and darker middle values. We then hit the core shadow. We then have our dark values. Now dark values are important because they are kind of like the middle values of the shadow family. So they have a darker side and a lighter side. These dark values are darker here, getting lighter as they come over there. So again, look for those nuances. Take your eyes out of focus to look for form shadows. When you take your eyes out of focus, you can see value very, very clearly. If you put your eyes in focus, you get distracted by details and you see the form shadows less clearly. So that's all 6. Now there's one thing I haven't talked about because we're only talking about form shadows. We haven't talked about cast shadow, and we're still not going to talk about that just yet because we want to talk about flat objects. So flat objects like this cube have only 5 form shadows. They have a light value is here, the middle value is here, the dark value is here, that's 3. Then it gets a little bit lighter. This goes from darker getting lighter. If you squint, you can see that getting lighter as it moves away from this corner, and then it starts to get darker again. That getting lighter is the reflected light, so that's 4. And then a highlight would be anything along this edge where the light value meets the middle value along this edge. That's where you'd see a highlight. So again, we have light values, highlight, middle values, dark values, reflected light, and that's our 5 form shadows on a flat planed object. Now this pyramid, we can't see anything but 2 planes. We can see a light side and we can see a shadow side. So we're not going to be able to see, if we saw 3 sides, we might be able to see, we'd see the middle values. But right now, all I can see, what looks to be the light, actually this over here is our light value, so we can't see the light values, we can see the middle values. But if I line my eye up just right, I could actually see 3 sides, and I could see, all right, yeah, the light value, the middle value, the dark value. But we can't see that from our view. We can only see 2 sides. So we have the middle value, which is still in the lights, or still in the light, and then we have our shadow side. So we have middle value, we have dark value, we have reflected light, that's 3. And then if we look here, there's going to be again a little bit of a highlight along this edge before it turns the corner. Middle value, highlight, dark value, reflected light. So again, I still have the light side, but I just can't see it. It's over here around the corner. So anything there's never more than 5 form shadows. So it doesn't matter if it has 6 sides like a cube, or whether it has 5 sides. I can't see, of course, the underside. but this has 5, 4 around here, and then it sits on the 5th. Or whether it's a 52 faceted ring where it's got 52 different flat planes, you never have more than 5 form shadows. Now if you had something that's 52 facets, you might start including, well, we got the light dark values and the darker dark values, and we have the light middle values and the dark middle values. But the idea is that you could go ahead and simplify them into one of 5. So no matter what facet you're looking at, it's going to be one of those 5. If we wanted to include, the light middle values and the dark middle values and the dark values and the light dark values, well, then you might say 7. But the idea is, again, you could go ahead and simplify it into one of 5, and it's really the way those 50 planes abut one another that makes them look lighter or darker. So that's the biggest thing. And you could get technical. Well, technically, yeah, there's 40,000 different values out there that we've been able to detect with cameras. But our eyes, for the most part, can't see more. Most people can't see beyond 15 steps of value from light all the way to black. And so we're talking about simplifications. And if you simplify something, it's actually more clear. And so that's why we use the 10-step value scale. But so we have our light values, middle values, dark values, highlight here, reflected light down here, and that's our form shadows. Now we haven't talked about cast shadow, and the reason why is we talk about cast shadows differently than form shadows. If all things are equal, so if this value here, and it's close, it's not the exact same. This ball's a little darker, but this value and this value of the cube is almost the same. And so if we look at the cast shadow, and then if we look at the core shadow, which is supposed to be the darkest part, we'll say, hey, the cast shadows are always darker than form shadows. And it may not pick it up in the camera too well, because again, cameras, they will push things darker or lighter. They try to equal the values out a little bit. There's a term for it, but it escapes me right now. But anyways, so what happens, this will look darker than what it is with your eyes. Your eyes can see more value than the camera. So this looks darker and this looks, almost the same value. But looking at this with my eyes here, this is actually lighter and this actually here is darker. So the cool part is when we're looking at stuff, we learn to look, to see, and we can actually make things even more accurate than a camera, because cameras are more limited than our own eyes. But something about cast shadows, they are darker than form shadows. So if we look at the cast shadow right here, you can only see a little bit of it right here, but that cast shadow right there is darker than the form shadow over here. If we look at this cast shadow over here on the cylinder, again, this cast shadow here is darker than the form shadow over here, and it's a little darker than the form shadow here. Again, in the camera, these will probably look the exact same, but they are not. There's a difference between the two. So again, these are form shadows. We're going to go ahead and look for form shadows, either light values, middle values, highlight, core shadow, dark tones, reflected light, if it's round. So again, if this was here, it would be like light tones, middle value, the highlights kind of, again, dissolving into the light values. And it's right here is the highlight. So you have light values, highlight, middle value, dark middle value, core shadow, dark tones, lighter dark tones, and then reflected light. And of course, don't forget the cast shadow. So whenever we look at an object, again, I'm going to take my eyes out of focus and we see light values, highlight, light middle values, dark middle values, core shadow, dark tones, or the darker dark tones, the lighter dark tones, and then the reflected light right on the edge. You're always trying to identify all the different types of form shadows. One last thing we'll talk about is, people will talk about it because it's usually in the cast shadow, and that is what are called occlusion shadows. When something touches something else, there's a little line here. It's a very dark sort of line, and that's basically a shadow where this is touching, the wood touches the cloth. It's called an occlusion shadow. Right here, again, where the cube touches the cloth, and again, it's an occlusion shadow. Occlusion shadow, occlusion shadow, occlusion shadow. If you're looking at my fingers and you can see those, the folds or the little lines, where they touch, those are occlusion shadows. So that's, again, which just shows that something is touching. If I took something off of here, like this has an occlusion shadow right down here. If I took this off, this no longer has an occlusion shadow and it seems to float. So if I don't have an occlusion shadow, it won't feel like it's touching something. That sphere won't feel like it's anchored or touching the cube. So occlusion shadows, look for those as well. They're really, really important. So this has been about form shadows, and I appreciate you watching, and you guys have a great day and be more creative. Bye-bye now.